Hello everyone, today we talk about the later New Kingdom Egyptian archers, so we are essentially in the centuries uh, predating the end of the second millennium BC. This is an important moment in the development of Egyptian warfare, and in particular because of the increased relevance of archery due to many reasons, but also reflected by the spread of composite bows that increased the capacity, the performance of the same archers so much that we see here first consistent anti-armor capacity rolls also against metal. The spread of archery a bit in all in all functions, in all arms, on chariotry, which hadn't quite happened the same way before, in the navy, right, and obviously a further kind of specialization in a sense of articulation tactically in the use of foot archery. Horse archery was there too properly. Cavalry was developing just now that it wasn't fully specialized in the melee, right, in as a function. So these were mostly skirmishers, but not only, of course, and warfare was still dominated by chariots. So we do have some archaeological evidence to have an idea more or less of what these archers look like. So today we talk mostly about their equipment. Then in other videos we will talk about the later New Kingdom tactics, military organization. So this is going to be just about the troop type. And the composite bow, as we were saying before, at this point seems to have become so widespread as to be standard fundamentally for all archers. But of course the simple bow was still there, right? It was always associated, but we don't have much of an evidence for this in warfare. We know it was as a side weapon that this was brought even on chariots, etc. This depended, of course, on the function. Had to be considered that archery was like always eventually in history as such an aristocratic, also the same pharaoh's sport in a way, something that every noble had to be properly educated in through, stressing of course its importance in hunting, in warfare, and so on. So unstrung, the bow had a double convex appearance, right? But when strung, produced a characteristic triangular shape. Not all were these. According to some accounts, royal feats of archery, the bow was drawn to the ear and could send a projectile essentially through an ingot of copper 3 fingers thick at close range. I'm not sure whether we know exactly how fingers actually meant at the time, but in measure, but that gives an idea of still the important penetration capacity of these shafts. Normally, let's say, these bows could arrive up to 1 meter 30 centimeters in length, and they were made by essentially fixing thin strips of horn, as composite bows are this, to a central wooden core, right, and building in other types of wood and sinew to increase elasticity. We made videos about later composite bows and properly how the strata were disposed within the structure, as to ensure this greater, mostly elasticity at the extremes, right? And in fact, as we look, for example, at Tutankhamun's tomb composite bows that are this extraordinary relic, we see that they were something varying between 110 123 centimeters in length, and they were very stiff at the center, especially. Albeit Tutankhamun's tomb, so here we are in 14th century BC, right? They contained numerous bows of different types, right? As we were saying before, there were also self bows, a single stave one, for example, about 70 centimeters long. Another one made from two staves joined at the center, 75 centimeters long. And while the composite bows had this, as we were saying before, that this triangular shape when strung, right, creating it when strung. Strings were made of 4 strands of twisted gut, and arrows usually had a reed shaft, but were footed with hardwood. Also, they were tipped with bronze. As to represent in structure, essentially spearheads on a smaller scale, right? And my understanding here is that that's quite of an evidence of, especially an anti-armor penetrating capacity rather than in anything. At least for these more powerful ones. That, however, as we've seen, as a composite bow, there could be many variations, but it's obvious that given the importance of the bow at this point, the Egyptians were probably not the only ones. Of course, the composite bow, as we were saying before, was introduced roughly around the Hyksos period. We don't know exactly when, but still. And other peoples made important use of archery. Think about the Nubians, their long bows, etc. It's something that would go on for millennia, actually, as a tradition. But the idea is that these peoples in Egypt, in the Near East, and so on, were at this point, as you know, on the fore in terms of military developments of arms and armor development in parallel, and therefore the bow is this dramatically important weapon. Virtually in every and growing importance in every tactical situation had to be designed also for being anti-armor in a way, right? Armor, naturally, as long as armor is around, there is always some, let's say, effectiveness to it that kind of balances out whatever the same arrow can throw at, the same bow can throw at. This is important to say that it may seem that then you nullify the effect, so the bow is useless. Well, the fact that armor arrives up to that point and kind of balances it still makes the enemy needing that kind of armor. So that's also a cost, right? So, which is also greater in relative terms to the one of the amount of bows that can eventually even cause significant damage, not just to the armored trooper, but also to the horses. We're also armored in some cases, but as you know, most troops really weren't. So, of course, and these weapons were developed for different targets as well, and different tactical situations. But if there were such bows around, and we know that they had important anti-armor capacities, and armor was developed further, in fact, parallel. Also, especially for the same charioteers were kind of more exposed to the same, also equipped themselves with bows and exposed to the same. Well, this means that, of course, the bows were effective, and the mere presence on the battlefield was justifying them, especially on such a large scale. Now, the arrow nock was also made of hardwood or ivory. Arrows could be either 3 or 4 fletched with feathers, and it could reach up to 1 meter in length. Interestingly enough, which suggests also the importance draw, right, of these bows, as we were saying before, even up to the year. We have some iconographic evidence for different types of archer. For example, there's one often depicted in the battle scenes of the Ramesside period. So these guys have shaven heads as a distinctive feature, right? This were, it was obviously symbolical in ways, but we don't know how much this might be an artistic license or not. Anyhow, they do seem to have belonged to a particular unit, possibly an elite one. And from some reliefs, we still have the colors of the artist, of course, represented the robes with, that is white, while the quiver and the quiver sling are brightly painted with mythological animals, such as the winged cobra, right? Or in imitation of exotic animal skins, and this naturally reflects the ideas that we know about. After all, we are in a very primitive time in the history of warfare. So the still the boundaries between the idea of the embodiment from the side of you know a god, right, and its animal manifestation was quite important, right? From the also the passage right that brought to wear such skins, and that maybe was properly part of being part of that unit, having that capacity. And this can be seen in other troops as well, not just elite units, especially the tribal ones, still the mercenaries coming from societies where that was kind of normal in as a standard for warriors. Regarding the quivers, we know that they were made of embossed leather and provided with a lid attached by a thong. And there are many examples of this preserved in the Cairo Museum, for example. Then there is another type because here it's a bit composite, right? We have some correspondences naturally from the iconographic to the archaeological sources, not always, but we can conjecture, right, how they would. The important here is also realizing armor, not armor, because again, archers were quite segmented tactically in this way. That we've seen this, and also in other cultures. Think about the Assyrians, etc. That there were various types also of heavy archers and lighter ones. We have evidence, for example, on unarmored Ramesside era archers, right? Albeit there may be some, like we don't understand often from the iconographic sources whether what they're wearing is normal clothes, right? Even maybe with some degree of uniformity, or something that could be factually armor, right? Either a stripe, this jerkins that are striped to make us believe that it may have even been scale armor, right? It's not easy to understand from the iconographic evidence, but also kind of padding other types of lighter armor. It's possible, right? And there were textile helmets, for example, to absorb at least a minimum of hit. Also, certain types of tunics, as they're represented, they might be forms of armor because they fit kind of similarly, right? In the way they were built. Some evidence also has been eroded by time, and so it's not easy to understand, but we can easily speculate on the fact that there was some such kind of segmentation in terms of different degree of armor. And there is also, today we make a mention for slingers as well, because this doesn't seem to have been much of a thing during the New Kingdom, right? But we have some representations of slingers in the naval battle reliefs of Ramesses III, who are inserted here at the Medinet Abu, right? And the picture is interesting because the essentially, as it's normal, now naval warfare is about mostly archery, and yeah, so you see on the deck that lots of archers, right? That only archers, and the only slingers are in the crow's nests, right? Of the Egyptian warships, by the way, because here I think we're fighting against the Shardanids, but so we don't know even in here whether the fact that the slinger appears only in a naval context and just in this specific evidence on a crow's nest, like a generalized idea. Of course, if of how slingers would be employed for some reason, maybe we can't see, right? Why would I can't think that maybe the slinger, in order to throw, needed to have kind of more space. The deck was more crowded. Archers could, yes, they had to string their bow, but only in a, let's say, in a dimension. Let's say in 2 dimensions. Fundamentally, they didn't need much lateral space movement for that. Whereas the slinger and the crow's nest might have, just been more, from one side also kind of more exposed, but at the same time freer to move, right? To use those sling, this with all the movements that are needed. Sure is that if we see slingers there, of course they were present pretty much everywhere in Egyptian warfare and beyond, because that's such a an ancient and standard weapon that so basically all cultures that it's a bit difficult not to see how this could have been a thing also in, for example, in open field, in some other circumstances that you can't see. Just they weren't represented that much, and this stresses perhaps the importance that archery had acquired and all the value that were in fact present within the bow, and the fact of using it and being trained and having an army equipped with this, that slingers would simply pass in the background without nobody caring more than much from an artistic point of view, because that would have seemed like any hunter, right? Any shepherd, anybody could be a slinger, right? The same goes for archery, but maybe not one of composite, but like the ones of, say, the almost uniform kind of looking idea that you have to have archers all equipped like with the same by some government, by the way, in this process, because there are debates also how they were carried, about the quivers, about the way the arrows were stocked and who distributed them, and how this was employed. This material was distributed logistically, supplying it, and so on. So that required surely more control and more subtle intervention. So in a sense, it reflected the pride also of these powers to say, okay, we can accomplish that. Whereas the slinger, something that, especially you like it's difficult. I don't know, but so far of years that I studied military history, any kind of properly trained, specialized unit of slingers, right? You have slingshot capability basically in every army, even among professionals. Like, I don't know, even Roman legionnaires knew how to use slings, right? It wasn't a prerogative of auxiliary forces, whatever. But because most people came just from those country backgrounds where they knew how to use such weapons. But a professionally trained slinger unit, frankly, I don't know of any, right? More than else, we have mercenaries that came from specific areas where the lifestyle of these people that were often poor as shepherds and so on would bring them to sell their own slingshot capabilities as mercenaries, but create a creation of a sling trooper, right? Per se, you could simply draw them from it everywhere, right? They were not going to make a dramatic difference. With all the effect that, of course, slings could make in general, especially against armor and so on, but unitary archery here was developing as just beyond structurally. And interestingly enough, regarding that aforementioned, knowledge that everybody would actually have in order to use a sling, even in Tutankhamun's tomb, slings were found, right? And this reflects how probably the hunting equipment that was associated to this the pharaohs, this aristocratic background, right? So we are in such a primitive time historically when everybody had to, even the elite, right, would have to know how to use a sling in the first place, which is something that went lost for the elite over the millennia, right? Archery remained, at least for a while. The sling is kind of overlooked, right? Even when we look at early medieval warfare, we see that apparently after classical antiquity, slings weren't much, at least a portrait. In my opinion, they were documented, at least they were still there. Much more importantly than when we know, but we hardly hear, I don't know, about noble in medieval Europe know how to use a sling. Well, at the time of the New Kingdom, yeah, this could have been a thing even for pharaohs, right? For universal rulers. And this makes you understand how closer this kind of warlike mentality and kind of primitive, still kind of vision of warfare still was within these people. All right, so this is more or less the deal. We will keep talking about ancient Egyptian warfare and beyond. For now, however, we stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time.